Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Welcome, everyone, to Spilling the Tea on HRTech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. This is our mid-February episode here just around the corner from Valentine's Day. So let's hope that we have some tea that is going to maybe get you happy for the holidays coming up. I don't know. We'll see. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. I'm your host, Stacey Harris. I'm the Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner for Sapient Insights Group, a research and advisory firm. And joining me today for the conversation is our co-host, Cliff Stevenson, Director of Research and Principal Analyst here at Sapient Insights as well. Welcome to the show again, Cliff.
It is great to be back. I'm feeling the Valentine's Day love.
It's a good time to have a little bit of love for HR technology, for all the people in our lives. It's wonderful. I know you did, not last week, but the week before, a show with Tammy, who is one of our research analysts, talked a little bit about what was happening behind the scenes in us preparing for the annual HR Systems Survey that's coming out in May. It was a great session. I loved hearing you guys talk a little bit.
It was really wonderful. It was nice to have a chance to bring Tammy out from behind the scenes and talk about all of the things that go on to make this report so wonderful. We also had a great conversation about trust, especially when we're talking about data. But I think in the Valentine's Day theme, I think trust is important. I think we'll probably have some stories today that touch on that as well.
I agree with that completely. I had the chance last week while I was out to visit my family. I have a granddaughter and son and daughter-in-law who live a little bit farther away from me than I would like. And so I spent 2 weeks getting a chance to see them in the sunny shores of Hawaii. That was wonderful. But it's amazing how quickly your kids and grandkids grow when you're not with them every day. We're going to talk a little bit about that balance between family and life and some of the things that tools are doing to help us manage that as well. So lots of topics today. The HR technology news is definitely heating up, not quite boiling yet, but we're getting there. We're going to be talking today about Workday's recent $250 million plans to invest more in their Workday Ventures environment, as well as a briefing they did this week on a couple of their Workday Venture companies, including Pulse ESG and North Star Financial Wellness Organization. Talk a little bit about Workday, about also saying, sorry about that, Microsoft invest in Darwin box. Now that's a few weeks old, but me and you didn't get a chance to talk about it. It came out right before I left on my vacation. And we think it's big enough that we need to take a moment to just pause and make sure people realize what Microsoft is doing, because it's bigger news maybe than a lot of people think. And then also there's a lot of updates this year, things that I think are important to the market, but oftentimes maybe don't get as much news. Paylocity is putting in place a new integration platform called Cloudsnap. We'll talk a little bit about that. LinkedIn came out with quite a few updates in their most recent revision that are worth mentioning. And then, as Cliff mentioned, there's some interesting news going on legally, and we've got a couple of friends that we might even go out and see if we can get some more news on this. But the idea of trust of employees, trust of your companies, a new ruling that came down around employees and whether or not they're stealing time from their companies in a work from home environment. We'll share a little bit about that when we get to the end of the wrap up this afternoon. But Cliff, let's start off talking about Workday. I think a lot of things that I'm hearing from small businesses is it's really hard right now to get early funding in this market, right? One of the things we saw 2 years ago was it was just hot. Everybody was getting money kind of thrown around for A investments and B investments and C investments. We're not hearing that from some of the small businesses right now. All of them are struggling to get more investment unless they're big and already have a little bit more of a brand and a name in place. And so again, not like it's completely stopped, but it's definitely slowing down. Workday's kind of doubling down on their Workday Ventures environment, which is where they basically invest in startup companies and make the decision about who they're going to be partnering with. One of the things they did in their conversation with the analysts this week was walk through the fact that previously they've always invested in technology that is sort of worked hand in hand with their existing HR and finance platforms. Looks like they're going to be making investments in some other type of organizations now, maybe those who are more partnership opportunities or tangential software that might link really well with the different technologies that they're using. They mentioned a couple of really interesting artificial intelligence companies that they're making investments in that don't really have a foot in current HR or finance spaces, but they are using things like the skills ontology that Workday has to do like robot programming. So kind of interesting differentiators there. What I was really interested in seeing was, as they mentioned this plan to invest this additional $250 million in their Workday ventures, they're also rolling out, they've got some new leadership in the organization. So they introduced that to the analyst, and some organizations that I had a chance to meet, at least one of them, while I was in Amsterdam, called Pulse ESG, which is an organization that basically is capturing all the data and reporting in an aggregate format for the ESG required reporting that's coming up in the market. Most of that is still voluntary reporting, but we are seeing a lot of organizations, and in Europe now, mandates coming out that by 2028, certain reports are going to be required for the environmental, social, and governance metrics that the corporate entities have put in place to say these are things beyond just financial metrics that we want to hold companies accountable to. Investments in small businesses is sort of risky, Cliff. You've seen a lot of them. This is an example of the kind of company that Workday is investing in. Again, ESG definitely has a place in HR and finance, but it's oftentimes a little bit at a higher strategic level. Do you think we're going to see maybe more of the larger vendors doing these investments in small businesses because the market's slowing down a little bit right now?
I think so. And I also think another driving force between that is more hunger from small businesses to use these types of technologies that previously maybe weren't available to them or that they didn't see a need for. But as there's more expansion of the talent market, there's more global reach, and there's just more ability to personalize the sort of products that are being offered. That used to be thought of as, these are sort of niche offerings, like you mentioned, and now there's more universal need for them. So I do think we'll see more of that. And I was also glad to see that the way that Workday was thinking about AI and machine learning isn't just in, chatbots or process organization, but in these sort of personalized approaches or in better forecasting to predict scheduling and workforce needs. So I'm glad to see that these are really being thought of as integrated methods of improving not just efficiency, but sort of work-life balance.
Yeah. One of the other organizations they had there that was in the supply chain space, they're doing these investments in both their finance and HR space. And it's interesting to see that, they're sort of balancing that, which I think is also good to your point that, things like artificial intelligence streams across those areas, right? And when you go beyond just a chat bot or some of the more traditional artificial intelligence tools we're seeing out in the market, and you really think about it as a underpinning kind of technology, you have a lot more ways that you can think about its use. Also a lot more ethics that you have to build in, and a lot more understanding of how that data is being updated and what kind of biases might be brought in. And, Workday is obviously one of the companies I think that focuses on that heavily. So I think we'll see that continue to be a big part of their conversation. The other organization I thought was worth mentioning that they had highlighted in their briefing was North Star Financial Wellness. Now, I've got quite a few briefings from financial wellness solutions over the last few years, and we're definitely seeing more requests for financial wellness from the employees themselves. Businesses are still a little leery, I think, about offering these. Particularly, a lot of them are sort of tools that are great at sort of giving an overview of what people need for financial wellness and education, but oftentimes hidden underneath the covers is that they're selling other products or something that you've got to be careful you're not sort of pushing things to your employees that may or may not be of value to them. But most of the time, something like a North Star Financial Wellness or like a Bright Plan that we've seen in the past, they do really great bringing up, I think, good education, coaches, North Star gave this great example of how they had an organization that they were working with who had an employee who walked through the differences on compensation, and the compensation seemed like it was a lot better in another organization. So they're getting ready to maybe make a change. And when they looked at the benefits that they were offered and North Star walked through all the benefit costs for them, they realized they were actually making more money at the existing job that they were at. And again, that's a third-party organization outside of your company. It's anonymous, but it gives those kind of conversations some weight. I think those are some of the great things we're seeing come out of this. What I do think we're going to see is that we're seeing about 50 to 55% of organizations who have wellness platforms right now in place. Only about 15% of them from our survey the previous year told us that they included a financial system or financial wellness component to it, Cliff. Do you think people are tying together this world of wellness and financial wellness? I know the employees are tying it together, right?
That's right. And, you'd mentioned the uncertainty about the economy. I think that's only going to drive more interest in these sort of platforms. And you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned the education component, because what separates good financial wellness platforms is that they have not just tools for loans or something like that, but that there's an educational aspect that allows people to make the best decision they can. And then that really ties into wellness as a holistic approach, where it involves stress management, time management. Obviously, finances is a big cause of employee stress. And if you can help handle that, you are helping solve a bigger picture, especially in sort of uncertain times.
Yeah, exactly. I've always felt it's a big power in knowing finances. I came from a home that didn't understand finances as well. And I know as I grew in my own career, it became a really big thing for me to get educated. I think it's harder than people sometimes think if they grew up in a family that understood finances to understand how hard it is to get educated in it. We also saw another, I think, big shift taking place in the market this week. And I don't know how, we saw some mentions of it, but I don't know as many mentions as I would have thought. Microsoft made an investment, not a full sort of buy or anything, but an investment in a complete HCM suite, which they haven't done. They've done a lot of investments in HRTech, but we haven't seen this kind of investment. They invested in the Darwin box. Cliff, we're gonna get a briefing with Darwin box. We've seen them come up in our report and in our surveys as write-ins. We're hoping to get more responses. They're fairly new in the market, and we're definitely hearing a lot of news about the work that they're doing. They're doing more clients and customers out of the Asia Pacific market, but I know they're trying to head into the US market as well. What's your take on just Microsoft investing in a full HCM suite right now? Is that surprising to you as well?
Yes, very surprising, but it probably shouldn't be considering what we know, right? There's a lot of interest in data. And I think that this is a great source of being able to provide a sort of full view of what people need by using the tools that they have. And that is part of their investment, I believe, is integration of the Microsoft tools and getting all of that productivity data mixed in with the employee sort of people data that goes along with it to help people make the best use of their time and, solve problems faster. So sort of looking at it, it makes sense, but it is interesting to see kind of such a heavy hitter, especially go after a full suite, like you said, rather than just sort of a product that just handles one aspect of HCM.
Yeah. Point solutions, right? Mm-hmm. Darwin Box currently has about 700 clients. At least that's what's in the updates and the notices that we've been shared with. They started in 2015, like I said, only been around for not quite 8 years or so, and in the market. In the middle of the COVID crisis, right? They were sort of growing rapidly. They're we're headquartered in Hyderabad in India, but they do a lot of work out of Singapore as well. And they're backed by a lot of other ventures. They have Salesforce in there. They've got Sequoia Capital. They've got, I think, a lot of money from what we would consider the big guys in the tech market. So it'll be interesting to see if this maybe was just a way to maybe get a foothold in the Asia Pacific market with a newer SaaS platform, which I think everybody's trying to sort of figure out how they leverage the current environments they have and reach into all the very large and growing employee base that's happening out of the Asia Pacific market, or if this is a first step towards going even deeper into the HCM market. There's no doubt we got some updates from LinkedIn that show that their investment in purchase of the LinkedIn platform has been not only just valuable for them, but with their growth of the Viva platform that connected with that and Teams, Microsoft is making big waves. They've taken leadership roles in 3, I think, of our categories this year in learning, in the employee self-service, and we're even seeing showing up in some of our analytics and planning data this year. So they're taking big chunks of what was previously HR technology sort of investments that organizations had, right? The other thing we saw, and I think this is worth mentioning, is what's happening with Paylocity. Now, a lot of people may just know the various vendors that they call the Pays, right? The Paycoms, the Paycors, the Paylocity, right? Paylocity serves generally the mid-market space. It was traditionally sort of more the 100 employee up to the 1,000 employee number. We're seeing them definitely grow their core HR, payroll, time management, plus sort of a suite of other options beyond just sort of the what we'd call SMB and lower mid-market into the upper mid-market, and even trying to reach sort of 10,000 employees and above. I don't think they're there quite yet, but we're definitely seeing that in their long-term strategies and plans is the goal to grow their market and their share in those spaces. One of the ways that we know many of these mid-market or smaller focused core HR applications, payroll applications that have built their suites out, have found that they struggle is in the integration space. Because when you start working with larger companies, you shift from maybe a company having 5 to 10 integrations to 50 to 75 integrations, sometimes upwards of hundreds of integrations, right, from our data. And with that environment, it's just too hard to hand code all that or manage that without the right resources inside your organization. And we are definitely seeing a need for more automated or at least some sort of a GUI interface integration. And that's really what Paylocity has done, I believe, with this, is they have rolled out a relationship with Cloudsnap. Cliff, can you maybe talk a little bit about what Cloudsnap is from your knowledge?
Yeah, Cloudsnap being basically a integration platform, I guess you could think of it as. One of the things that sort of sets it apart is that it's very low in terms of its resource needs. So it can quickly and efficiently get the data from all of the different marketplace ecosystem applications that might be connected to Paylocity, right? That, of course, gives you better ability to sort of see where you're at, to make decisions based on that. And I also just want to say thank you, by the way, for mentioning all the data, because I was worried that the poor listeners, they're going to turn it over to Cliff. He's just going to mention data again every time with this guy.
Nope. I think data's in our world, right? Yep. Well, and I think that's, that integration component is something we're seeing more and more organizations really struggle with. It definitely shows up time and time again in the written in comments. And the more you can make that user-friendly, the better. And so I think it's something to watch those organizations who've taken the time to invest in that. All right. And then just sort of wrapping up this week, we talked a little bit about LinkedIn and some of their updates earlier as we were talking about what Microsoft as a whole was doing. But LinkedIn released a lot of updates. Cliff, can you maybe walk us through? Because there was numerous updates here that I was like, wow, I didn't know they were sort of expanding in these areas, right?
Yeah. So what they were talking about is their hashtag big ideas sort of conversation, really looking at their roadmap, some of the concepts they want to push forward with, everything from just, greater use of AI to some things that I thought were a little different, such as a heavier focus on accessibility, both in terms of standardizing accessibility job titles that you would see when using LinkedIn, but also improved accessibility of their own system so that, there's high contrast or it auto captions videos, things of that nature. So glad to see that, accessibility is sometimes one of those things that people talk about, but they're actually doing something about. Mm-hmm. They have a new thing called job collections. So this is more for the casual user of a a more passive approach for someone seeking a job. They may just want to look at unicorn companies or companies that really focus on work-life balance, for instance, and just have that as a sort of set of jobs, a job collection as you go. There's something on scheduling, future posts that's more, I think, of interest to people like ours. And then, of course, they are also sort of touching on the idea of looking at B2B products, business purchases, so that people can make better decisions on the sort of products they want by collecting information and allowing some comparing and contrasting, which I was very pleased to see because it just proves how valuable companies, such as ours, are to the market, that are able to sort of look through all that information and say, these are what differentiates these products. There's some data on that. Obviously what they're doing is just sort of a basic showcase of them. Then that will allow people to make better decisions and, look at the more in-depth research such as we provide. So I think it's a good sort of stepping stone into learning about what's out there so that people can really understand what's important to them.
Yeah, when we look at our stats, we ask to share where do people get their sort of most of their HR technology buying data from. 67% say from online. We know a lot of that comes from online content and assessments, but it's a growing area, I think, where people are looking to find more tools that give them more guidance instead of less. I was really intrigued by this career opportunities and personal job collections, because this is how I help people. When people come to me and say, well, I'm really looking at changing my job. Do I update my resume? I always tell them, what kind of company do you want to work for first, right? Like, think about that first. I'm like, oh, that's what this job collections does, right? So I thought, good move. LinkedIn has done a nice job there. It'll be interesting to see if that becomes like, if everybody decides, oh, we're all unicorns, or we're all like, it depends on how they actually create those categories and manager and monitor them. That's always a big challenge with online open tools. But I think my favorite thing is the accessibility stuff that they've done, right? The fact that it wasn't already there is a little frustrating, but I think, they're getting there. And I think it's tied to their video tools, which is nice. It's tied to their like titles and stuff you said. I think there's opportunities there. So I was glad to see some of that. So yeah, very good stuff. Talking about sort of accessibility and trust, right?
Yeah.
Wrapping up the conversation today, one of the last things we want to talk about was, I don't know how often you sort of look at news about what's happening around the globe, but one of the things that we saw that came out, it was right before I think I went on vacation. So it's, again, a couple weeks old, but it was in the Canadian news, and it was British Columbia Civil Resolution Tribunal. So I don't know enough about Canadian law. I'll have to ask my friend Cheryl what that means. But basically, I'm assuming this is sort of a civil litigation like you would see here in the United States. But an employee in that environment was ordered to pay her former employer more than $2,600 after tracking software showed she engaged in what they called time theft while working at home. Now, it should be noted that this employee had gone to the tribunal claiming that she was fired without cause. So then they went back and looked at all the records, and they had found that there was this time where she was supposed to be working and she wasn't working. And so basically she got paid for work she didn't do. Again, I don't know a lot of the laws and regulations in the Canadian labor market, but I just thought, boy, this is kind of a slippery slope we're going to be seeing. All these technologies, and we saw them growing. We saw probably about a 15 to 20% increase in our data in the amount of different tools organizations are using to track employees, particularly in the work from home environment. We know there's been a lot of news about people using technology to move their mouses and try and get away with it. But at the end of the day, there's this ongoing conversation about trusting your employees. I mean, Cliff, what did you think about this when you read it? I know I read it and I went, oh, darn, this is not a case I would like to have seen gone to court, right?
Right. Yeah. And you had touched on some of the things that do separate it. I think when some of the headlines are written about this could be a little clickbaity because there were a lot of extenuating circumstances, such as this being actually a countersuit, as you mentioned, that there was timesheets put in for work that wasn't done, which is a little different than people, not being at their desk or something like that. But it is worrisome that this conversation is going on only because I was hoping that during the time of expanded work from home, that there'd be some proving that people are able to complete this work, to do what they need to do and not be distrusted by their employer. At the end of the day, your ability to get the job done should be what is most important. However, a few bad apples spoil the bunch, right? And so when there are people submitting fraudulent claims, it's going to cast a very negative eye on people having more autonomy in their own scheduling. So I think it is definitely worth watching how these cases go, but I hate to think of any of these things as a referendum on the concept of working remotely and working from home, because at the end of the day, we should be able to trust each other, employers and employees. In fact, not only should we need to be able to. It's just the way the world is working now. And if we try and rely on technology to foster that trust, as you had mentioned, Stacey, it'll just be a cat and mouse game, a bit of an arms race. So we're going to have tracking, fine, then we'll fake our keystrokes, that sort of thing. Instead, it needs to just be, I think the policy should be, we will just make sure you're getting done what you're supposed to be done, and you can set how you do that best. For some people, that may be going into the office. There's still people that prefer that, and that's okay, right? Just be able to need to take an honest look at how we get work done, and as employers, what work we need to be done, right?
Yeah. It's funny. Anita Lenkin, one of my favorite people who's out blogging and posting on LinkedIn, who talks about payroll and what's going on in the future of work. She posted this, I think it was today, it might've been yesterday, about some office company, basically, putting out that this was now we've hit a mark, 54% of offices were now filled. Of course, they were making that judgment based off of the offices that they owned, although there were a lot of them in the market, and they were doing sort of like slide in, check in and check out of the offices. And she's like, well, it's good to see, right? But, there is this thing, like people want to work where they want to work. We know this has been the conversation for a long time, but I think there's two issues here that companies really need to address, which is one, trust of the employee. The one thing we know from the research over and over again, that employees who feel less trusted and feel like they're being monitored more are more likely to feel less responsible for the work they're doing. That's just sheer human behavior, right? And then we also know that people who are not trusted at multiple levels then are more likely in general to do things untrustworthy over time, because again, that animosity, that feeling of distrust goes two ways, right? They don't trust their company to do what's right by them. The company doesn't trust the person to do what's right by them. There's this constant sort of back and forth. And I know it's a really hard nut to crack, but I think it's something that we as HR professionals have to be at the front of, both from an ethics conversation perspective, from a data perspective, and from hey, what are we really trying to accomplish? If it is to improve productivity, there might be a better way to do it. To your point, maybe you incentivize based off the outcome versus the number of hours. Maybe you incentivize off of the conversations or the customer success satisfactions instead of, again, the number of hours put in, those kind of things, right? There's a lot of ways, I think, to get around this conversation. But there was another report that I saw this morning about another research effort where they had done, conversations about whether you trust employees and whether that employee was seen as trustworthy and high performing versus not trustworthy, and maybe or highly trustworthy and moderately performing versus low trustworthy and highly performing. And organizations found that, both the employees themselves like to work with teams where they found people were trustworthy, even if they weren't as high performing, more so than if they were working with high performers who were not trustworthy. And well, yeah, that makes sense too, right? Like we've got to think about the work environments as well, and think that, sometimes we drive so much for performance, we create our own challenges, our own issues for companies, right? This is when oftentimes when I talk about data-driven HR, what I remind people is that sometimes what that shows you is that you get performance outcomes, but you lose things through that performance, like time for people to be innovative or time for people to cross-train. We're seeing that in manufacturing environments right now and in supply chain warehouses. They've optimized them so much, people don't have the ability to cross-train. Now they've got to think about additional training and onboarding tools, right? It's just a lot of times we just overlook the things that happen when we just look at one metric or one way of looking at things. So I thought this was a well worth conversation to have in the market, but I think oftentimes we look at it sheerly from a should you or should you not from an ethics perspective. And I think we have to look at it from a lot of different ways, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I know we've run through our time and then some this afternoon. I know just our 30 minutes are up, but boy, I'm excited to get back into the year with news and articles that we're going to be talking about on an ongoing basis. So as you're hopefully starting to see, we're going to be dropping one of these every 2 weeks. So continue to come back and listen if you're wanting to get updates on what's happening in the HR tech space. Quick reminders also as we wrap up today, Cliff, that the big report was released in December or in early January. So if you haven't downloaded the 2022-2023 annual report that comes out from Sapient Insights every year, it is now available on the website for download for everyone for our 25th anniversary, along with the shorter version of the keynote session. So you can download that as well if you'd like to look at the Cliff Notes, if you're like me. If you're interested in getting more in-depth data or support, all those things that Cliff had mentioned also in his comments in your HR strategy journey, just drop us a line at info@sapientinsights.com to schedule some time to chat. If you want us to talk about a particular topic, whether or not you're doing some new updates in your HR tech environment yourself, you've got a topic you'd like Cliff and I to chat a little bit about and give our insights on, feel free to send us also some comments in that info@sapientinsights.com there about what you would like to hear in the radio show or in the podcast as well. Sign up for our newsletter to get ongoing updates on research launches where we'll be speaking or visiting and when you can participate in our annual survey. So that can be found on our website. And a big thank you to our guests, as well as a thank you to our production team, including Brand Method Media Group, who helps us produce our podcast run by their amazing founder, Kelly. Our marketing team, Lisa Renko and Zoe Britton, who make sure that this all gets wrapped up and produced in a way that makes sense and everybody can access it. And as always, thank you to our listeners and community. We couldn't do this without you. You are all amazing. Cliff, do you want to just say goodbye to everybody? I know we didn't get a chance to do our usual wrap up.
No, thank you. That's perfect. And it's Valentine's Day. Remember, trust. It's a big part of that relationship. Just bringing it all back,
There you go. Make sure you have trust with the person that you're going to be spending your Valentine's Day with. Personal or professional, I would have to say, right?
There you go.
All right. That's it for this episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. We hope it's been just the brew you needed to start the engines running this week. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review to stay up to date with immediate breaking HR Tech news and get all behind the scenes content. You can follow me on LinkedIn or Sapient Insights as well at Stacey Harris HR or at Sapient Insights, and on Twitter at Stacey Harris HR and Instagram at Stacey Harris HR. You might see a few pictures of Hawaii this week on there. All right. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another pot of HR tech updates and insights. We'll see everyone there soon.